Time now is 2 p.m. This begins Media 4 on the record.
Hi, Justin. So before the break, we were talking about DEI. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Was screening grants, projects, et cetera, a directive for DEI, a directive that came from DOGE?
No. From the executive order.
Okay. And did you apply that same, did you apply those executive orders to several agencies during your time with the government?
Yes.
Okay. Which other agencies did you apply them to?
Every agency that we went to.
Okay. And that's the EO about DEI and the EO about gender ideology?
And the EO about initiating a DOGE lead and finding optimization savings.
Great. But those two were included in
the scope of what we were focused on.
Got it. Who told you to apply those executive orders to your work at grants, or at agencies?
The executive orders themselves require that every agency adhere to them, and we were there to help the agency leads implement EOs.
Okay.
That was just the protocol for the small agencies team.
Okay. Who told you that part of your role would be helping to implement those EOs at the various agencies?
Nate?
Okay. Anyone else?
The leadership team, Josh, Stephen Ehikian, Anthony Armstrong.
Okay. Did those people know that you were detailed to NEH?
Yes.
Okay. Did you tell them that? I can strike that. How would they have known that you were detailed to NEH?
We were focused on all of the small agencies. We probably had, the 100 agencies that we were detailed into.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as you went through, strike that. You testified earlier about the fact that you reviewed grants yourself to mark for termination. Is that right?
That's not right.
To explain why that's.
We mark our interpretation of grants and whether or not we think it adheres, and that's we as in Nate and I, and we present that back to the agency leads, who ultimately make the final decision.
But what were you marking?
Compliance with the EOs being relating to DEI or wasteful spending in the context that we were just talking about. The team had focused on all of the DEI, and we were consolidating the list of the DEI grants that were flagged,
Right.
and reporting that back to Adam and Mike.
Okay.
We weren't terminating grants on the spot.
Right. Yeah. I didn't mean to suggest that if that's what you understood. What I was asking was, let me break it into its several parts. You were reviewing grants. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. And you were reviewing grants for DEI, gender ideology, wasteful spending, et cetera, right?
Yes.
Okay. But including those three specifically, right? Plus others, but those three explicitly you were using to assess or analyze the grants. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. And was it your understanding while you were doing that that the grants that you marked yes for under those concepts would be teed up for later termination?
Objection.
Subject to Adam and Mike's input. We read through all of them and explained what we felt. Hence the column for Mike McDonald, Adam Wolfson to tag as keep.
Right. Right. I guess I'm not. We'll get
Procedurally.
Yeah. Right. We'll get there. That's not exactly the question I'm asking. Was it your impression at the time of marking those grants that that was somewhere on the pipeline towards termination of those grants? Did you assess them with the sense that these are grants that if I say yes, DEI, it would be moving that grant closer to eventual termination?
Objection form.
Yes.
Okay. So as you were going through the grants, and again, you noted that you did private review of grants for DEI and wasteful spending, right?
Yes.
Objection.
As you were doing that, what informed your understanding of whether a grant had DEI?
We applied the same definitions that were listed in the EOs that we read through and overlaid that into the context of what was the mission of this grant, what are the outcomes, why was this awarded. We applied that to every grant.
When you say we, who are you talking about?
Nate, me, and what I would assume the rest of the NEH team who was making a comprehensive review to align with the executive orders.
So if you were looking at a specific grant, your starting point for analyzing that grant is, does this comply or not comply with this set of EOs? Is that fair to say?
Does this present, the way that we framed it was, does this potentially conflict with the EOs?
Okay.
If it did, Mike and Adam, this is what we think, why it conflicts. What do you think? So, yeah, it is.
Okay. And as you were assessing whether or not it conflicts, can you explain kind of your your mental impression? Like, strike that. Maybe I can ask, like, where were you doing this work, first of all, physically?
GSA,
Okay.
the GSA building.
At your desk at the GSA building?
Yes.
Okay. And so maybe, and I know this sounds boring, but maybe walk me through what an afternoon of reviewing grants would look like for you at GSA.
Objection.
The list that I'd consolidated from Mike's team has details from EGMS and Brett Bobley and team on each grant. Read all the details about this grant and overlay the EO's mission and what we're trying to find on top of this grant.
Okay. Do you think it's fair to say that after looking at hundreds of these, you had synthesized some sort of kind of easier way to assess whether a grant conflicted with an EO that didn't require you to go to the EO every time and read the whole thing?
There's definitely patterns that you can recognize. Grants that are two different grantees that are accomplishing the same mission. You read every one, and yes, after the 6th or 7th, 100th one, you do start to develop pattern recognition of how each grant is infringing or not on the EOs.
Did you read every one?
Yes.
What were some patterns that you noticed?
Promoting an LGBTQ study, stipending research on gender fluidity.
Why is, in your view, is LGBTQ DEI?
This is based on the EO discussing underrepresented minority groups, of which LGBTQ is often associated with.
So, I guess in synthesizing, and strike that, part of your synthesis of the EOs was that LGBTQ stuck out as obviously contrary to the spirit of those EOs. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Objection.
Not entirely.
Okay. Why do you say not entirely?
Do you have a specific grant in mind?
We'll come to that, but I want to get your understanding of what you're doing day to day in reviewing these grants. Pardon me.
And you were asking what again, specifically about LGBTQ relationship
Yeah.
to DEI?
Yeah. Is it fair to say that in applying this synthesized understanding of the EOs, LGBTQ grants jumped out as being contrary to the nature of the EOs?
Objection.
Contrary to the nature, meaning conflicting with.
Conflicting with, yes.
Potentially.
Okay.
Ultimately, not my call.
Okay. What else did you think was DEI? Anything besides LGBTQ?
Gender ideology, race, cultural, or underrepresented cultures.
And just to be clear, marking something for DEI was a precursor to cancellation.
Objection.
It informs Mike and Adam to make a decision.
Okay. But you understood your marking of a grant as DEI to be a precursor on the road to potential cancellation. Is that fair to say?
Being in conflict with an EO, potentially.
Okay. And one of those EOs was about DEI.
Reducing spend on DEI grants.
Right, okay. And so you said race, underrepresented groups. Why would you suggest that grants about those issues be terminated?
I didn't suggest they be terminated. I only tagged their relationship to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
With the understanding that you marking that would serve as a precursor, a signal to cancel those grants, right?
Objection.
Signal to review those grants.
On the road to termination, right?
Objection.
If that's what they wanted to do, yes.
Well, I'm a little confused. Your goal with DOGE was to save money, right? Reduce the deficit and apply these EOs on the road to those goals, right?
Objection.
To assist agency heads with being in compliance with the EOs. Part of the EOs were to find savings through
Right.
reduction in spend.
Right. Right, okay. And so part of, we discussed this, hours ago. Part of your work was to help to identify grants for termination, right? I'm not saying you terminated them. I just want to be clear that we're kind of collating these things. I'm not saying them all at once. Part of your job was to identify grants for potential termination. Is that fair to say?
For the review of Mike and Adam to comply with the EO. Reviewed that this grant was not in compliance with the EO. Ultimately, it's their decision to cancel it. And we were helping them review these grants in the context of adherence to the EO.
In the context of the grants potentially being terminated,
Relating to DEI.
relating to DEI.
That's what we give to them is the grants that are not in compliance with the EO's mandate, ultimately their decision to terminate.
Okay. And so you said not in compliance with the EO's mandate. Earlier you noted that things that jumped out to you were LGBTQ plus issues, oppressed minorities, race, etc. Is that fair to say?
Those stood out to me as relating to DEI.
Okay. So would you, just applying one, let's take LGBTQ. Was it whether the author was identified as LGBTQ? Was it whether the grant mission was about LGBTQ? What were you assessing?
Objection.
There's a grant description, and we were assessing if that had related to DEI.
Okay. LGBTQ being one form of DEI that you've explicitly stated in the deposition, right?
A form of it.
Okay. Race being another one.
Wasteful spending being another one.
Sure, yeah, but race is another one too, right?
Objection.
However the EO had stated it
Okay.
was how we interpreted it.
Okay. But you've already noted that you were synthesizing and not referring to the EO every time you looked at a new grant. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
Okay. Let's go to tab 7. I think this will be exhibit 8. It's kind of small. Can you see the text from where you're sitting?
Could you scroll up? Oh, he can hear through the, okay, that's helpful, thanks.
Wait, what document is this?
This is US-0000453132. So I'll represent that this is the attachment that was referenced in Exhibit 7 in that email from you to Mr. McDonald and Mr. Wolfson that we reviewed before the break.
Which one was that? Which email?
the one that said, it had the grants section bullet, and it said we reviewed all active grants for DEI involvement and marked them accordingly. Remember that?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the document that was attached to that email. And if you scroll down a little bit, Jacob, I'm sorry, I'm doing the same thing. Can you scroll down, Jacob? Thanks. Keep going. Yeah, so starting on page 3 of this document and going down through page 66, there are just, hundreds and hundreds of grants. Does this appear to be the document that you would have been referencing in that email to Mr. McDonald?
And this came across in the attachment, right?
Right. Yep.
Yes.
Okay. But it looks like the type of thing that you were talking about in that email. There's a... Sorry, can you scroll up again, Jacob? Yeah, right there's good. Yep. There's a column all the way to the left that says yes/no DEI ? Then there's the next column is division. The next one is number. The next one's award number. And then if you keep going, there's a DEI rationale. There's the MM/AW that I think we read earlier in one of the emails. Does this look like it comports with your understanding of the document that was being referenced?
For that email, yes.
Yeah, okay. Do you recognize this document?
It is one of a few that looked very similar to this.
Okay. Did you contribute to this document?
Yes.
What did you do to contribute to this document?
At this point, I don't remember because there was a lot of back and forth between the team doing their review, Adam and Mike doing their review, and Nate and myself doing review. I don't remember which stage this was in, frankly, because documents like this were passed throughout our interactions.
Okay. Well, let's just take kind of the life of the document. How did you contribute to it over that lifespan?
Mike and Adam gave what their team had done, reviewing every outstanding grant, tagging for DEI or not. The first thing we did was re-review the ones that had already been reviewed by the team and assessed our understanding of compliance or not with the EOs, and sent that back to Adam and Mike because that's what they asked us to do. Over the life cycle of this, and again, I don't know which stage we're looking at here, we passed it back and forth and identified the ones that were most aligned with the direction that NEH was choosing to go, and in most compliance with the EOs.
Okay. You said in the direction that NEH was willing to go?
Was headed.
Was headed.
Yes.
Okay. What was your understanding of that direction?
Pro-America, meritocracy, mission-critical grants,
Okay.
Garden for American Heroes, elimination of wasteful spending DEI, and adherence to the EOs.
How did you come to that understanding?
Our meetings,
With who?
Mike and Adam.
Okay. And what exactly did they say about about those focuses of DEI, or excuse me, of NEH?
That they knew they needed to be in compliance with EOs and reduce the amount of DEI grants that they had, and separate funds to go towards Garden for American Heroes and America 250 initiatives.
Okay.
Garden for American Heroes. Yes. Statues and garden, yeah.
Okay. There's a column called DEI rationale. Do you know who would have contributed to the entries in that column?
Me and Nate.
Okay. And I think I understood you to be saying earlier that you would read the grant description and then make a judgment based on your understanding of the EOs to fill in this column. Is that a fair recounting?
Directionally, it is.
Okay. Anything you want to clarify about it?
Yeah.
Sure.
Part of it is framing, assisting Adam and Mike with their review, right? So part of what we did was pulling in a large amount of data from different sources and putting it into something that is digestible for the team, because Adam and Mike are going to review every grant, but we need to convey our thoughts about DEI rationale.
Okay. So how did you, like, any of these rationales, how would you have actually gotten from the description to that DEI rationale in the column of that same name?
Using the grant description.
Okay. And applying a synthesized understanding of the EO, what the EOs called for?
Interpreting the grant description
Okay.
into the executive order context.
Okay. So, again, you mentioned that certain concepts you saw as being contrary or conflicting with the EOs, and you named LGBTQ, race, oppressed minorities. Do you remember that testimony?
Yes.
Objection.
Okay. So, like, is it your view, or while you were doing this, would you say it was correct to kind of state that a project that discussed an underrepresented culture, for instance, was something that the executive orders required to be terminated?
Objection.
Required to be terminated? No.
Okay. Is the issue with the word required? I guess, why did you repeat that particular clause?
The EOs are meant to instruct how to frame the problem,
Okay.
and eliminating wasteful spending and DEI grants was the mandate.
Okay. So there's 60-something pages here, and thousands of grants. Did you write all of those rationales?
Reviewing the grant description, you can extract and highlight key texts, right? As we said, there are patterns to what is related to DEI. It's not Garden for American Heroes. It's typically involving underrepresented cultures and communities, race, LGBTQ. And that informs what's written in DEI rationale.
Okay, so you didn't write those descriptions.
We edited and wrote on top of, but they pull out the key words and phrases from grant description.
What pulls out the keywords and phrases?
There's extractors that you can layer on top of Excel to grab the keywords, and then you can pull in how it frames in the context of the EO.
When you say, okay, so what extractor did you use to pull out keywords from the Excel?
Well, Excel has a lot of native functions to pull out keywords. You can overlay that on top of grant descriptions.
But respectfully, I'm not asking about Excel's capabilities. I'm asking what you actually did on this spreadsheet to pull out key terms.
Objection.
We used closed source aggregators that drew the context from the grant description into DEI verbiage that related to this grant. And then over top of what was extracted, we write in additional thoughts and clarification.
What's a closed source aggregator? Strike that. What closed source aggregator did you use to assess these grant descriptions?
Within Excel, you're able to put in a closed loop LLM that extracts the keywords and phrases.
What LLM did you use?
OpenAI,
That's ChatGPT.
that's the umbrella. It wasn't ChatGPT, but it's one of the LLMs in.
Okay. So you used an LLM to screen the grant descriptions for certain terms?
Yes,
Okay. How did you come up with that list of terms?
the executive order has explanations of what is involving DEI,
Okay.
and you keyword search into the grant description to extract the keywords and phrases that match the phrases that are listed in the EO.
Okay. Why did you use OpenAI to assess these grants rather than
We
read
did.
them one by one?
We reviewed each grant, and for the sake of efficiency, pulled out the key phrases and layered on top our view of how this overlays with the EOs.
Okay. So, give me an example of a keyword that you would have.
LGBTQ.
Okay. And so, if a grant had LGBTQ, you would, well, I guess the model would identify that. And then you would mark it yes for DEI.
No, we extract the phrase and the 4 to 5 words that come before or after that keyword and adjust what's written to address why this may be related, in our view, to something conflicting with an EO.
Did Mr. McDonald know that you were using an LLM to assess the grant descriptions?
I'm not sure.
What about Nate Kavanaugh?
I don't know.
Did anyone instruct you to do that?
No.
Okay, so you used an LLM on your own initiative to screen thousands of grants for what the LLM perceived was DEI?
Objection.
No.
Okay. Why no?
We had to read the grant description and make our own assessment of whether this was related to DEI or not. The DEI rationale column is only meant to contextualize it by extracting the key phrases that came up in our keyword search, so that Mike and Adam, instead of having to go in each one and call us and say, grant 1, why did you believe this was DEI? And we were able to put in our rationale for each of these grants after having looked at grant description.
So you reviewed every grant yourself?
Yes.
Okay. And you also use an LLM?
to pull out
Objection.
the keywords and phrases
Right.
so that Mike and Adam can see what we see
Right.
without needing to have them call us and explain each grant. We put it into a digestible document and explain in the DEI column why we feel, based on the grant description, this could be related to DEI.
You keep saying we, but you just testified that Nate didn't know you were using an LLM, that Mike McDonald didn't know, Adam Wolfson didn't know. Who's we when you?
Objection.
Is the question whether or not they knew that I was writing a DEI rationale for each one?
Well, when you say we, and then fill in whatever you did with the LLM, is there a we? Who are you working with on this the particular LLM project?
Yeah.
Okay.
Whether Nate knew I was using an LLM or not, I'm not sure.
Okay.
That's what I said.
Okay.
We were collectively pulling in DEI rationale to explain why the grant description we felt was relating to DEI.
Okay. If you had already been reviewing every grant one by one, such that you gained an understanding of it, why then run all of those grants again through a large language model like OpenAI?
Objection.
I'm not sure.
You don't know? But no one told you to.
No.
Okay. Was this in an effort to increase efficiencies in the project?
To make sure that Mike and Adam knew what context we were reviewing this grant,
Right,
individual grants.
But you knew the context because you would review the grants.
Yeah.
Okay, so why do you need an LLM to tell Mike or Adam that?
We needed Mike and Adam to understand where we were coming from. Because it is their decision. And instead of calling them for each grant and explaining each grant, we pulled out a DEI rationale to explain our point of view so that Mike and Adam could see our point of view. They have the grant description themselves. It's ultimately their judgment call. But we were helping them review. So the DEI rationale puts it into context for them.
Absolutely. I understand why you might want to communicate a DEI rationale to Mike and Adam. I don't understand why or how the involvement of OpenAI would be required to do that.
Objection.
Is that a question?
Why did you use OpenAI for that purpose?
Excel functions are limited inherently by whatever you can do in Excel with formulas. And so in order to grab the phrases that we were searching for and to put it into something that we could adjust, to best contextualize it for Adam and Mike, I elected for using that.
Okay.
But I read every grant description. I could have just filled it out on my own. So the answer is I don't know why.
Okay. And, but I guess the model was pulling out whether or not a grant description involved DEI. Is that fair to say? Strike that. How do you know that your understanding of DEI was consistent with the model's understanding of DEI?
Objection.
Because we read every grant description and adjusted DEI rationale based on our perspectives.
So the final rationales that you would have sent to Mike and Adam would be different than the rationales that were spit out by OpenAI's model?
Some of them.
Okay. But not all of them.
Hard to say we made edits in every single one.
Okay. Jacob, can we go down to, it's row 880 in that number column? It's going to be far down. You might just want to drag the cursor, yeah. There you go. You're close. There you go. All right, it's right there. So what we're looking at is row 880 of Exhibit 8, US-0000453132. This, if you could scroll down a tiny bit, or maybe scroll up actually, just so we can see that far left column in 880. Yep. So, do you remember the far left column being DEI, question mark, yes/no? We can go back up if you want, but
Well, this is just what you're saying, and the far left column is yes or no DEI.
yeah, right.
Yes.
Okay. So you can see in row 880 it says yes.
Yes.
Okay. And that means that this project, in your view, did have DEI such that it conflicted with the EOs that you were applying,
Objection.
right?
Could I read it?
Sure, yeah. Can you zoom into that? Just zoom in a bit so we can see the text larger, Jacob. Oh, okay. So let's find 880, yep. I can read it into the record. For row 880, it says under the DEI rationale column, the Troth-Yetta project aims to increase access to diverse humanities collections, which aligns with DEI goals of promoting inclusion and diverse perspectives. Did I read that correctly?
Yes. Could you scroll to the right for the project description? Sorry, I'm yelling again.
So this is in the next column over, that's the grant description. It says the Troth-Yetta Humanities Infrastructure Project will allow interdisciplinary humanities programs and centers currently scattered across campus to be housed under one roof to better serve students, staff, faculty, campus, and visitors. In particular, the Alaskan Native Language Center and its archives will be showcased to increase student and public access to diverse humanities collections. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
And then we can go back to the DEI rationale column, Jacob. Again, it says the Troth-Yetta project aims to increase access to diverse humanities collections, which aligns with DEI goals of promoting inclusion and diverse perspectives. Did you write that?
Yes.
Did OpenAI write that?
Portions of it, maybe.
Okay. So tell me why this project is DEI.
Objection.
It's promoting inclusion and diverse perspectives.
Okay. What about diverse perspectives is DEI?
It's not merit-based.
Diverse perspectives is not merit-based?
There's just no reason for it to be. This is involving DEI. It is involving. It is promoting through federal funding diversity, equity, and inclusion principles.
And those principles are, I see right here, promoting inclusion and diverse perspectives. Right.
Scroll to the right for the Native Alaskan language. Native Alaskan Language Center's archives showcase to increase students and public. Yeah, it is just promoting this language center and the archives
What's
for
wrong
the sake
with
of diversity.
What's wrong with promoting a language center?
Objection.
It's wasteful, non-critical spend.
But you have a DEI rationale there.
Objection.
It is DEI. Just explain why it was DEI. Because you're promoting a subset, Alaskan Native Language Center and the archives, to promote diverse perspectives.
A subset of what? You said you're promoting a subset. What does that mean?
A minority group.
Okay, so a project that promotes a minority group would be conflicting with your interpretation of the EOs.
Objection.
Is that fair to say?
It's subjective.
Subjective based on what?
It's all based on the interpretation of each grant and the details of it. So
Oh, sorry.
you can't overgeneralize
Yeah.
a statement like that.
Your interpretation of the grants.
It depends on the grant.
Based on your interpretation of those grants. Is that fair to say?
Objection.
Through the lens of applying the EO's language.
Right. But you ultimately decided how you would apply the EO's language to these grant descriptions, right?
Ultimately, I made the effort to overlay the way that the EO was written with the grant descriptions, and whether they conflicted or not is ultimately the decision for Adam and Mike.
How did you deal with edge cases? Or let me take a step back. Were there ever descriptions that you said, this might be DEI, it might not, I don't really know? Or was it always clear?
It's not always clear with DEI, but the context of wasteful spending is a fairly clear way to delineate
Right.
Way to what?
the grants.
Would you say that spending on DEI is innately wasteful?
It depends.
When you were assessing this Alaskan language project for DEI, it was on the basis that it promoted a minority group. Is that fair?
Objection.
A minority culture, minority group.
Okay. I suppose, so I guess what's a majority culture?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, did you ever screen anything for majority cultures?
In what context?
Well, I guess, what's a minority?
Objection.
In this context?
Which context? This grant?
Of you analyzing all of these grants for DEI or conflicts with the EOs?
Fully depends on the grants.
Okay. When you say it fully depends on the grant, is what you're saying that you would have to read the grant to determine, based on the system that you were applying, whether or not that grant was promoting DEI?
Yes.
Okay. So let's go now, Jacob, to row 252. Okay, so we're in row 252 of the same document. Can you read what's in the first column that was yes or no DEI into the record?
Yes.
It says yes in that column, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then the DEI rationale in the column of the same name says the documentary addresses gender-based violence and overlooked histories contributing to DEI by amplifying marginalized voices. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Is gender-based violence DEI?
Could I see the full grant description?
Well, sure, but I guess that's a question that has nothing to do with what's in the next column. Just like, is gender-based
Once again, you need to allow him to read the document.
Well, I'm asking him to answer your
No,
question.
he gets to read the entire exhibit. This is how depositions work. So if he says he needs to see part of it, you need to let him see part of it.
Okay, counsel, just for the record, let me say this pretty clearly. So I'm sure you've been in cases where there are 100 or 1,000-page contracts that need to be submitted in full. I'm sure that you're not implying that every witness needs to read every page of a contract if they
I'm saying if
do
he
request
asks
it.
to read something,
Okay.
you have to let him read it. And you're trying to prevent him from doing that. I don't know why, but if he says to read it, let him read it.
Right. Okay. Go ahead and read it, please.
Which one was it? Jacob, sorry.
252, right there. I can read it into the record. The grant description of column or row 252 says, production of My Underground Mother, a feature-length documentary that explores the untold story of Jewish women's slave labor during the Holocaust through a daughter's search for her late mother's past. A collective camp diary in which she wrote and interviews with dozens of women survivors who reveal the gender-based violence they suffered and hid from their own families. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. And then in that row or column, you say yes DEI. Did you write the rationale in that column?
Can you scroll over, Jacob?
Again, the rationale says, the documentary addresses gender-based violence and overlooked histories contributing to DEI by amplifying marginalized voices.
Yes.
Why is a documentary about Holocaust survivors DEI?
Objection.
It's the gender-based story that's inherently discriminatory to focus on this specific group.
It's inherently discriminatory to focus on what specific group?
The gender-based, so females during the Holocaust.
And you believe that that's inherently discriminatory?
I'm just saying that's what it's focused on,
Sure. But
and this is related to DEI.
Right. But you just used the term inherently discriminatory. What did you mean by that?
it's focusing on DEI principles, gender being one of them.
So a documentary that's about women would be DEI.
Objection.
Is that fair to say?
No.
Okay. So tell me why what I just said isn't DEI, but what you just said is DEI.
Objection.
It's specifically focused on Jewish cultures and amplifying the marginalized voices of the females in that culture. It's inherently related to DEI for those reasons.
Okay. Because it's about Jewish culture.
Plus marginalized female voices during the Holocaust, gender-based violence.
Okay. Is this when we focus on a minority? Is it your understanding that, the Jewish people fall into the category of a minority?
Certainly a culture that could be described as minorities.
Okay. So how did you go about determining what was a minority and what wasn't a minority for the purpose of identifying DEI in grants?
Inherently focused on any ethnicity, culture, gender, no matter the sort of race or gender or religion or, yeah.
Okay. And you said that your understanding of the purpose of marking these grants for DEI was eventual possible termination, right?
Objection.
For Mike and Adam,
To make a judgment about termination.
to see how we felt this did or did not comply with DEI involvement from the perspective of the EOs.
Okay. With the ultimate goal of assessing which grants needed to be terminated, right?
Helping Adam and Mike review comprehensively the grants adherence to existing EOs that had come out.
And if they did not comply with EOs, those grants presumably would be terminated, right?
Objection.
Up to Mike and Adam.
Was it your understanding that the goal of this review was to understand which grants would be kept versus which grants would be terminated?
Certainly to understand where they landed in the scope of, do they adhere to the EO or do they not?
And if they didn't adhere to the EO, those are grants that would be more likely to be terminated. Is that fair to say?
That's what the EO wanted, was to find savings in the buckets that they identified. Ultimately, Adam and Mike made that call.
I'm not asking who made the call. I'm asking for your understanding of what would happen to grants that were marked with DEI. Was it your understanding that these grants were being isolated as grants to terminate?
To be compliant with the EO, yes.
Yes, to terminate in order to be compliant with the EO. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, we just needed Mike and Adam to see which grants and why related to DEI. And as you've said, ultimately the call was their judgment to make. But the intention is to find savings, redirect funds to America First Priorities Garden for Heroes. DEI is one of the buckets we screen for, as well as wasteful spending.
Yeah. want to be clear, you know we're going to be talking to several others at NEH as part of this lawsuit? Mm-hmm. Okay. And other people that are members of the DOGE teams that you've been discussing?
Objection.
Are you aware of that?
Well, I guess to answer your previous question, I don't know who else you're interviewing from NEH, and I don't know anybody else outside of Nate.
Okay. Do you know that we were going to talk to Mr. McDonald?
I don't know.
Objection.
Okay, you don't know. We will be talking to Mr. McDonald. We'll be talking to Mr. Wolfson. We've already spoken with Nate, as you know. Do you think all of them would agree with your framing here that, strike that, would they think that part of this review was being done to tee grants up for termination?
Objection.
Who do you mean they?
Mr. Wolfson, Mr. Kavanaugh, Mr. McDonald.
I don't know.
Did you discuss terminating grants that were related to DEI?
Yes.
Okay. Did you discuss terminating grants because they related to DEI?
To align with the EO, yeah.
Okay. And so when you mark, for instance, this grant about the Holocaust as DEI, was it your understanding that that would make it more likely that that grant would be terminated? I'll remind you, you're under oath. I mean, and we're going to talk to others.
Objection.
Yes.
Okay. And so, based on your judgment here, you believed a grant about women during the Holocaust that were subject to gender-based violence, a documentary about that, should be shortlisted for termination at the NEH?
Objection.
Which one?
Grant 252, the one that we've been talking about.
We were
It's a yes or no.
presenting it
question.
to Mike and Adam
That doesn't answer my question.
under the context of, does this comply or does this not? And this is the rationale that we give for whether we believe it complied or not, or related to DEI in any capacity.
Right. But the first column is yes or no.
Yep.
Okay. So you're saying yes, it has DEI, or no, it doesn't have DEI, and that's the very first column of the spreadsheet. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And you put yes in the first column with respect to this grant about the Holocaust. Is it your understanding that grants marked yes for DEI, Mr. McDonald and Mr. Wolfson would have viewed as more likely to terminate based on DEI grounds and EO grounds?
We were helping them,
That doesn't
so
answer.
it's fair to assume that they would think that.
Okay. All right, let's go to, well, actually, I think we could go off the record for a moment.
Sure.
Take a 5-minute break, is that cool?
Time is 3:04 PM, concludes meeting 4 off the record.